This is Void Deck, a podcast from Science Centre Singapore exploring local science stories. I'm your host, Janice. Today, we're asking, is your phone making you more Kiasu? According to the Institute of Mental Health, 1 in 3 Singaporeans struggle with problematic phone use. Could doom scrolling and social media addiction make our brains more fearful of missing out? To help us understand the psychology behind our screen habits, we talk with behavioural scientist Dr. Jean Liu. Dr. Jean, welcome to the show. Before we dive into the questions, would you like to give a quick introduction about yourself to our listeners?
Yes, I'm a psychology researcher and I specialize in looking at the impact of technology like social media and screen time on youths.
Awesome. So firstly, what is kiasuness and is it something that can be measured or studied?
Kiasuness is when you kind of look over your shoulder and you think, that person's doing something or that person has something that I want and you feel you need to go and get it too or do the same thing. It's actually not a Singaporean phenomenon, even though we often say, Singaporeans so kiasu. The West call it FOMO. Researchers call it social comparison. It's the basic idea that we turn over our shoulder, look at somebody else, and we want that too. Of course, the Singaporean story that we tell is that if the hawker centre has a queue, we must join it, even if we don't know what it's selling. And that is fear of missing out. The West would call that the fear of missing out.
So you would say that the culture of the kiasuness that we have as Singaporeans will make us more susceptible to FOMO when using social media?
Yeah, it's funny. I think researchers often link the two together. First, let me unpack social media a little bit. That term actually means quite a lot of things today.
Yes, it does.
The landscape has changed quite a fair bit. It's everything from your social networking sites, and that's what most people think about, your Facebook, your Instagram, to the content sites like YouTube. And then you also have your messaging sites like WhatsApp. And of course, there are the hybrid ones as well that combine a few of these features. When we think about FOMO, most of the research has been done on FOMO and the social networking sites, right? And, the typical story that we hear and what research seems to find is that if you are very afraid of missing out, then you are most vulnerable to using social media the most, especially the social networking sites like Facebook and Instagram. And you're also most vulnerable to the negative effects of it. So, for example, if you are left out in a WhatsApp group, that's going to affect you the most if you're very FOMO. Whereas if you're quite thick-skinned and you don't know you don't really care what's going on around you, it seems you aren't as affected by the consequences of social media.
In that case, from a neuroscience perspective, why do you think social media is so addictive? I personally would like to know because I too find a hard time trying to disengage from social media. So why do you think it's so addictive?
Yeah, I think again, we think of the different range of social media platforms, right? We have the TikToks, the YouTubes, where we know that there's the infinite scroll. We just keep watching over and over again. When we stop, something automatically plays. And then, we thought we were going to spend half an hour on it. All of a sudden, we have spent 3 hours on it.
Correct.
Time flies from us. And I think no one will deny that it's enjoyable, right? I mean, we watch it because it's fun to watch. I mean, in an earlier generation, television was like that as well, right? It's enjoyable activity and then time flies. Of course, there's the other side as well, right? The WhatsApp messages that keep coming in. There's the Facebook, Instagram notifications that keep coming in. And that, I think, works on a different level. Psychologists liken it to gambling sometimes, where we ask ourselves, what makes something rewarding? And the kind of way that rewards are given, which is intermittent, you cannot predict, and then it comes up every once in a while. That kind of reward contingencies make you use it the most. So things like WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, you can't really predict when someone is going to give you a like, reply your messages, so you keep checking. I think there are some things that are inbuilt, some things that by nature, they're rewarding, and therefore we sometimes feel ourselves not being able to control our usage or using it a little bit more than we had anticipated.
So would you say that we associate social media as like a little platform that gives out gifts to our brain whenever we receive likes?
People often say, the dopamine hit.
Yes,
right?
correct.
You often hear that word, the dopamine hit. I always try to break down the evidence a little bit. As a scientist, What do we mean by the dopamine hit? There's no denying that, yeah, it's rewarding. But actually, there's very little research that tells us that when you use a digital device, you get a dopamine hit. To actually say that, yeah, dopamine is released at that point of time, you need to use something called a PET scan. And that's when you inject a radioactive tracer, and that helps you to see as a proxy whether there's dopamine activity in the brain. So one study has done that in 1998 involving 8 people. And what they found was that, after people play a video game, so not even the modern, this was 1998, right? So the video game, it's consistent with some level of dopamine release. And that study has been used a lot to say, see, when you use Screentime, you get a dopamine release. But actually, researchers will then take a pause and say, what does it mean to have increased dopamine release? Because dopamine is involved in a lot of other things like movement, working out probability. So just because you see a dopamine increase doesn't mean it was addictive. The other side of the neuroscience research tells us that, it's true that when you anticipate getting a social media like, when you anticipate receiving a message from a friend on WhatsApp or, seeing a TikTok video, you have increased activity in the ventral striatum, which is a part of your brain involved in rewards. But anticipating anything that is nice, people enjoy, like money, photographs of attractive people, food, anticipating any of these also has the same kind of neural activity. So it just means that, we find it rewarding. I think that's as much as you can say about the neuroscience of it.
Now, speaking about that, recently I believe there's a lot of buzz about this thing called brain rot. I'm not sure if you heard of it. It's a slang term that describes the supposed mental decline from consuming too much trivial or low-quality online content. But in your take, is brain rot actually real? Does exposure to this kind of content actually affect our brain functions?
I think we as a society always feel the need to be productive at all costs. And so if we see what we term brainless content, we kind of feel a bit bad. I mean, it was in the case of television as well, right? Where parents often would tell kids, why are you watching that kind of content? Can't you go and study? Can't you watch an educational show instead? Even for adults, we feel that pressure. Sometimes we should be reading an e-book. We shouldn't,
Yes.
But actually, if you think about your own life, there are just times when you're tired and there's no way you're going to do an online course at that point of time. You just want to relax. And I think much of this, what we call the brain rot, serves a purpose, which is to help us relax. Just like how in a different generation, you turn on the TV at the end of the day. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. In fact, sometimes researchers now tell people who are insomniacs having difficulty sleeping that maybe some screen time can help you wind down and go to sleep, which is counterintuitive. I mean, for a long time, people thought that it was the other way around. You watch screens, you won't be able to sleep. But now they're finding out that, actually it helps you to wind down. So there's nothing wrong with watching what people would call mindless content. I think where it becomes a problem is 2 areas. One, sometimes the content is a lot about news. And if you spend too much time searching about news, what we know is that people get anxious because often news is negative. We hear about the geopolitical crisis. We hear about climate change. You hear so much of it and you keep checking it, you become more anxious. And the other thing that we have to watch for is that if we spend too much time on it, and then you neglect all the other things you're supposed to do. So I think those are the 2 things to watch out for.
Okay. So actually, the supposed brain rot is actually okay. It's okay content for people to consume.
In moderation.
In moderation, yes.
Balanced.
Balance, yes. But I think this will ensure, people not to feel so worried if they're consuming such content in moderation. All right. And so let's move on to our next question of the day. Given how common it is for people to be on their phones for hours at a stretch, me included, does being online too much cause your brain function, such as memory retention or attention span, to deteriorate?
It's a hard question to ask. I mean, it's a very cost method. People have tried to do this kind of research where they said, okay, I'll give you a survey. You tell me how many hours of phone use you've been using, how many hours of screen time over the last week, and I will measure your brain function or I'll give you a memory test. First, it's notoriously difficult to self-report how much time you spend on your phone because you tend to use it during the day. So those correlational studies it's hard to interpret. Second, now that we use the phone all the time or our laptops all the time, is it meaningful to get a concept like that? Because of course, the activity that you're doing is so different, and the average staff today, goes on the computer and works all day on the screen. Do you differentiate that from the going the bus and scrolling through TikTok videos? So I think you have to break it down a little bit and also measure it objectively, and ideally not just do a correlational study, but actually trace people over time or actually do experimental studies. Those kind of studies are much harder to do, and people haven't quite done that, or it's just much less. So the answer is that I don't think the verdict is out on just general screen use and brain development. It's much harder to trace that. But we do know about certain activities online that change the way you function. For example, people have found that increasingly we're so used to Googling information that when you ask people about a topic, the way they sort the information out seems to be by thinking, okay, how am I going to Google it? So I think it changes the way we organize information and so forth.
Now, moving on to our next question. What can we do as a society to develop healthier relationships with our devices?
We need to find balance.
Balance.
The
Balance,
keyword,
yes.
balance.
The keyword for today, balance.
Balance, because it's not about, saying, oh, it's so bad, we need to ban everything, and then you go and hide in your room without a device or any screen time. It's also not about saying it's so good and there are no problems with it. And, somehow in between those two realities, we need to find balance, right? One of the researchers came out with this idea of digital minimalism. It's not about saying, how much time am I using with my phone or my devices? It's about saying, think of your bigger life goals. Is this getting in the way of your goals or not? And I think that's a very empowering kind of message, right? It's not about the absolute number of hours. It's really about, is this serving you or are you serving it? And working that out takes some art. But yeah, I think that's the balance that we need.
I like that. Digital minimalism. Okay, I shall do my part to do that as well. Okay, next question. Do you have any creative or unusual hacks for reducing screen time?
The complaint many people have is on time use usually, right? I really need to do this assignment, this report, and it's effortful. Often it's effortful. And then you then find yourself going on TikTok, you find yourself scrolling videos, checking your friends' status updates. What I often do in those situations is to go somewhere without Wi-Fi, sometimes be a bit more radical or put my phone aside so that I have that focused time in order to do the task at hand, even if it's more effortful. Sometimes some people use what we call the Pomodoro technique as well, which is where we say, okay, I'm going to do 30 minutes of focused work, and then I'm going to use my phone for anything that I want for 5 to 10 minutes. And that also helps people to focus. I think that often is everybody's biggest complaints for each other to say, parents like to say, why are you using your phone again and not doing your homework? But even ourselves, right, in our working lives, we often get distracted, especially for tasks we don't feel like doing.
That's true. So being intentional with your phone time.
I think the other thing that I want to say is that we're often guilty of not being present for the people around us. And the irony is often we are taking our phones to message. So we're trying very hard to connect with other people online. And this has to do with FOMO as well, right? We don't want to miss out the message from our friends. But then we take out our phone even when we're sitting and having dinner with somebody else. And that affects the person sitting next to you. My research group did this line of research, and we found that people find that equivalent to ostracism. They find it horrible, they don't like it, and they feel like, you have left them out. But we don't think of that. We're just mindlessly taking our phones even when we're in front of people. So I would think my caution is on two sides. I would say, if you are in front of somebody else, you really have to think about how your phone use affects them. And I would say put it away if you can. And if you can't, explain why you're using your phone. The other side, of course, is time use. And, if you need to be productive, then take radical steps to do that.
Yes, I like that. Being basically in the present moment and then appreciating those who are around you right now.
Yeah.
Just to wrap up this session, maybe just one last question to Dr. Jean. So do you think your phone is making you more kiasu?
I think it depends. So I'm going to give the careful answer to say it depends on how you're using it. If you're looking at other people's lives and feeling like, that's oh, why is that person doing that amazing thing? I feel like I'm missing out on something. Then yes, it's making you more kiasu. But if you're using it for healthier ways of connecting with friends, organizing activities, then no, it's not making you more kiasu.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Jean, and we hope to see you again next time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Void Deck. Want more Singapore science stories? Head on to voiddeck.science.edu.sg. And if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time and stay curious.